Hello and welcome to another Sky Sports Fantasy Football Q&A. We are here once again to answer some questions and dilemmas from Twitter. Of course, if you want to get involved in this, I do post a tweet out every Wednesday night asking for any questions or dilemmas, and you can find that up in the top left hand corner of the screen there if you want to get involved in next week's video. We are kicking things off today with Ian's question, who says, I have no one playing tonight, so is Romero enough to captain when I bring Anderson out? Also, if Mbeumo is out for a while, where should I use my 9.4 million, Rodri or Watkins for the single game day? So of course this has been recorded on Thursday. There is games on tonight, and obviously with a lot of people looking to be bringing Romero back in, the main popular transfer looks to be for Anderson, which really hasn't worked out a lot. I think Anderson's had 4 games that we've had him, and he's got about 9 points from that, so it's really not looking too great. Is Romero enough to captain? I think it's a tough one. I definitely think Son massively trumps Romero in terms of captaincy, especially when you look forward to the single game day against Nottingham Forest. I think I'd definitely rather be wanting Son than Romero. If you can't afford Son, it is what it is. I think you are at least covering it off with Romero, and you can hope that he's going to get passing tiers as well. So I think if you can't afford Son, sure, Romero should be able to cover. I think for tonight though, especially, like, Newcastle looks good as well. If you had someone like Isak or Trippier, I think could be decent captains, even Dubravka. But I think Romero, he is obviously enough to captain, but I don't think he is an ideal captain for tonight, in my opinion. With Mbeumo being out for a while, where should I use my 9.4 million? I think it has been confirmed now that Mbeumo will be out for a couple weeks. I think that was the exact statement from Thomas Frank. Personally, I definitely would be going for Watkins for the single game day. I think going for Watkins against Sheffield for that captaincy day is definitely a go-to. Rodri obviously going to be a very good option up until the overhaul, but he does miss a game as well, so you just kind of have to consider that as well. And I think especially with Watkins having the single game day, I would definitely be going for him. The next question comes in from FPL Spartans, who asks, what are the top 3 rankings for Newcastle assets? Now, of course, Newcastle are kind of coming into a fairly decent fixture run. I think they still have Spurs to play, but looking over the Christmas period, they've got games against Luton, they've got games against Forest as well. So as someone that a team that you're probably going to want to consider getting players from. I think, in my opinion, I do think Isak is the number 1 asset from Newcastle, especially if Callum Wilson's out to the overhaul. If he does end up coming back before that, then it kind of changes a wee bit. But I think if you're guaranteeing that Wilson's going to be out to the overhaul, I think Isak, being the number 1 striker, is definitely the number 1 pick for Newcastle assets. I think Trippier goes at number 2. I think he is still, I believe, the second highest scoring defender so far in the game. And he, again, good fixtures for them. I think even with Pope, they will still keep some clean sheets. And he has been picking up a couple tackle tiers as well, and pass tiers on the odd occasion, so I definitely would go for him. Then the third is kind of like a bit up in arms with who there is to pick. I think Dubravka could be quite decent. I think Gordon not as much, because I don't like the idea of Gordon as taking up one of the 5 midfielder spots. I think there's so many good midfielders you can get right now, and I don't know if I'd want to be going for Gordon, because you're never going to captain Gordon, and he's just kind of there as a backup, and I don't think he can cover Isak, in my opinion. So I would probably have to put Dubravka at the number 3 spot, but for me it goes Isak, Trippier, and Dubravka / Gordon, but I'll go with Dubravka. Next up is GG Magpie, who asks, who's the best Hwang replacement if he gets a 5th booking? Now, obviously Hwang is on 4 bookings right now, and there is hope that he doesn't end up getting his booking against, I believe it's Arsenal, where he'll then be suspended for the single game day. In my opinion, I would probably just be keeping him through that suspension, as long as it isn't the single game day. I think if he gets the yellow card before, if he gets it on at the weekend, for example, and then he misses the Arsenal game, I would just be keeping him through and then having him for the captaincy. In terms of replacements, I think I would just go to Palmer if you don't have him. He's just a straight swap, and you can also captain him for the same day. I think Edward could be a decent one as well. If he gets booked before the single game day, you could punt on Edward for The Crystal Palace Brighton game could always be a decent option as well. I wouldn't go for Tsimikas at this point. I think the Liverpool fixtures are getting a little bit more difficult in terms of keeping a clean sheet, so I would probably leave him alone. You could always go back to Basuma. Was a popular pick at the start, not as much anymore after he picked up a few yellow cards. I think he could be decent, but for me, I think Palmer would probably be the easiest option. That way you're still covering the captaincy on Christmas Eve, and then maybe Edward as a punt. The next question comes in from Adam Byron, who says, I own both Van Dijk and Trent, which one would you lose for Son? I think ideally I'd want to be keeping both. Obviously Liverpool are on a fantastic run of form. Trent has had great points over the last couple of weeks. On a normal occasion, I would say Van Dijk. I think he's more suited to Sky. He kind of gets the odd goal and he gets more passing tiers and stuff than Trent does. But with the form Trent's on right now, I don't think there's any way I'd want to be taking him out. So ideally, I would like to keep both of them. But if I had to get rid of one, I think right now it would be Van Dijk. I think I don't see a world where I'd be wanting to take Trent out in his current form right now. I think he's got 2 goals and an assist in his last 3 games. So I think even with his fixtures, I'd be holding them through. So I think right now it'd probably be Van Dijk that I get rid of. For our next question, Streaky says, do you have plans to use transfers after the City Palace game with all the fixture gains? For example, Haaland or Rodri out? If so, who for? I think it's probably best going in the spreadsheet here, so I'm going to quickly move over to that one. So obviously with the Club World Cup starting soon, City and Brentford are missing a game, which leaves a big gap in here with their fixtures. So when we're looking at it, for me, I think I'm actually just going to keep both of them. I don't see any real incentive to take them out. So looking at the big gap, obviously there's a lot of 3-for-0s, a 4-for-0 if you don't have a Villa player. You can use that captain against Sheffield on that day. A lot of 3-for-0s, so again, Villa, Liverpool have a 3-for-0, United, and technically Wolves and Chelsea if you never had a captain for them. Not even Chelsea only have one fixture in that as well. So there's not a huge amount of games going on while City aren't playing. I think if you could also obviously look at maybe there being 4-for-1s if there is any, which I don't think there is starting from that point. So if we go down to just the Sheffield game, again 3-for-1, so it's 3-for-1s. So there's no 4-for-1s existing there. And you're only getting a couple of 3-for-0s, at which point I think if you're going to take someone like Haaland out, you're really going to want him back anyway for this Everton away game and Sheffield at home. So if you're going to be taking him out, you're going to be making 2 transfers, in which case you're probably going to want 20 points minimum from whoever you bring in for these 3 games. So for me, I just don't think it's worth it. When you look at the Liverpool players, there's United and Arsenal in there. Looking at the United players, there's Liverpool and Villa in there. So for me, I don't really think there's too many games that are worth it. Maybe if you've got someone like Rodri and you don't have Watkins, it could be an option there on the 17th to bring Watkins in there. That way you get him for the captaincy, and then you could maybe hold him through to the 30th, and that way you get the Burnley at home game as well. But for me, if I'm taking any of them out, I'm going to want them back for Everton and Sheffield, especially if we're talking Haaland, because he's easily going to be the best captains on both of those days. But for me, I think Rodri, in terms of trying to conserve transfers and stuff, I don't think he's going to be worth taking out for me. For the next question, Kai says, I took Watkins out for Isak on Saturday, but I'm regretting it. Do you think I should stick with it or go back to Watkins? I could swap him for Trippier. Again, it probably isn't ideal. I think if you've not got that single game day with Villa and Sheffield covered, you probably are going to want to get Watkins back in. In terms of Trippier, I'd maybe look at keeping him. Again, like we just mentioned, you could possibly look at a City player if you've got one, other than Haaland. I think with Haaland, I just would be keeping him, to be honest. I think if you've got anyone else, you could maybe look at going on to Watkins. I don't know. It's a really tough one. Of course, you have already made that transfer. I know you mentioned as well in the tweet that you could take Isak out, but it seemed like a good move. I definitely would be sticking with Isak. I think he looks quite good all the way up to the overhaul. So if you can keep him, I definitely would. That way you've got Isak, Haaland, and in any way I would try get Watkins back in. Maybe you could wait till closer to the time when the single game day comes around. That way. You kind of can look out for injuries and stuff if anything happens in your team. Then you can bring Watkins back in, because I think they've still got an Arsenal game to go as well at the weekend. So you could probably give it another 1 or 2 weeks before bringing them back. But I think for that captaincy day, you're definitely going to want them. So moving on then, the Scottish Fraudiola says, I was top of my mini-league by 120 points, but in the last 3 weeks that gap's reduced to 40. The second place team is private, but I'm convinced they've used a lot of transfers. I have 32 left. Is it worth using some before the overhaul to get the lead back, or should I just stick? I think it's a pretty simple answer here. If you think the second place has used a lot of transfers, I don't think there's any need to be trying to get the lead back, because that's going to come at the end of the season anyway. Like, as we always mention, it is a long game. It is literally just coming up to the halfway point. There's no point in using up a lot of transfers just to get a small lead back, and then you're kind of evening the playing field again with the same amount of transfers. I think if you're keeping 32 transfers, you stick with the current plan, which is to hopefully have 30 by the overhaul. Again, 1 or 2 is a leeway. It isn't the end of the world. But if you're just going to play your own game throughout the entire season, you should probably beat second place, especially again if they have used a lot of transfers, because then you have a massive advantage over them at the second half of the season. But if it's me, like, obviously it's not great to start seeing like gaps close and then see yourself getting overtaken, but you just got to remember at the end of the season it's going to be you who's at the top of the table, and everything's fine. So definitely be saving those transfers as much as possible, and don't worry about the mini league really until the last couple of months. Next up, Adam says, I have an option of bringing in Romero for Dunk today or transferring out Tsimikas and Onana for Romero and Sanchez on Sunday. Dunk's currently my only cover for Brighton Palace single. What do you think? In my opinion, I think you should probably just keep Onana. He is, I think, now the second highest top scoring goalkeeper in the game. I think unless you desperately need that captaincy for Christmas Eve, I don't think there's any need to waste a transfer on it. So ideally I'd be keeping Onana. And then Tsimikas, I don't think is the end of the world that he get benched yesterday. I think Klopp said a few times like Tsimikas cannot play every single game, but ideally he is going to be the best left back, so I do think he is going to start and play on Saturday, and he'll maybe he could play the rest of the games up to the overhaul, but maybe only misses one in between all that. So I do still think Tsimikas is a decent option. Again, it isn't ideal that he isn't going to play every single game, but I don't think there's any need to be taking him out for that. And then, of course, as I said about Onana, so I do think Dunk to Romero is probably the best transfer you've got. In terms of covering the Brighton Palace day, I think right now it's just not looking good in terms of any of those guys. So unless you wanted to punt on someone like Gross, someone like Edward, as I mentioned earlier in the video, I think it's probably best just to skip that game. I think there's a lot of stuff going on with it, and it's probably going to end up just being a low scoring game anyway. So for me, I think Dunk to Romero tonight, and then I would probably just look at skipping Brighton versus Palace. Our next question comes in from Aaron, who says, I have Tsimikas and Anderson, but no Palace Brighton cover if I sell the latter. Which one do I replace with Romero? If so, is it still worth going for Saka to Son? I have 34 transfers left. So your transfer account's looking great. You're looking well on track to be finishing on 30 by the time the overhaul comes round. Tsimikas and Anderson, as I just said, I don't think Tsimikas needs to come out right now. He's 7.2 million. He's technically classed as an enabler, and Liverpool are keeping clean sheets. He's getting assists. I don't really think there's any reason to be bringing him out. He's not really taking out much budget. Anderson to Romero, I think that was always the plan anyway, even though the Palace Brighton game was coming up. I think I would just be making the transfer because Anderson has been absolutely awful, and the way this is looking, he's not going to pick up passing against Brighton anyway, because Brighton are always the ones that pick up passing. So you're really going to be looking at like a 1 or 2 pointer from Anderson on that day. So I think I'd just be going for Romero, because if you're captaining Anderson, you're going to be keeping him through a City game and a Liverpool game as well in that time, where again he's probably going to be picking up 1 pointers, and then you're going to captain him and he's going to get like a 2, 3, 4 pointer anyway. So I would just be getting rid tonight. He's not looked great at all. Getting Romero in. I do still think the Saka to Son move is worth it. I'm going to be making it my second team tonight. Just make sure you do have cover for all the other days where Saka could possibly be a captain. For me, I've got the cover there. I do only have Saka down as the best captain once, in which time I still have Son to cover for that anyway. So I think take a look at it. If you're not going to captain Saka again all the way up to the overhaul, I'd make the transfer, because I do think Son is going to be one of the best captains for at least 3 days going up to the overhaul. So I do think that's worth it, and I definitely think doing Anderson to Romero is good as well. So our next question, the penultimate question, is a slightly different one. Comes in from Adam, who says, what would be your ideal 11 on Christmas Day? Based on everything you've seen and know up to now, if you were to tuck in into Christmas dinner and looked at your team, Haaland, 3 for 0, etc. So I read this question and I wasn't really too sure if it was like if I had an overhaul on, like a wild card basically on Christmas Day up until the overhaul, so really only like 1 or 2 games, or if it was just your ideal 11 by the time Christmas Day comes round. So this is the team that I made. Basically, I was including like captaincies previously and stuff as well. So I had Sanchez here, who was technically the captain. I had Palmer as well. So that would have been like Christmas Eve's captain. So hopefully I'd be at this point sitting at Christmas dinner and I'd have 20 points with Palmer, because it would have been last night's captain. Gross as well, because he's the captain for the Palace Brighton game previously as well, and then the rest just kinda fits itself together. I think Salah, Son, Haaland, Watkins, all just good captaincies, and I believe maybe only like 4, and I think Isak I had as one captain as well. And again, like I said, with the Luton and Forest games with Newcastle, I definitely think he's the best Newcastle player to go for. Saliba, best defender in the game. Romero, probably the best value defender in the game, and then Trent obviously on great form right now. So for me, that covers all the captaincies, and pretty much does everything that I would want. So I think if I was to overhaul right now, that could maybe be something. I think that probably is what my team would look like right now. No Rodri in there. Again, would like to have, I think there's 0.3 million in the bank in this team as well. Would like to have Rodri, but again, he does miss a game, so if we're talking totally ideal, would probably leave him out of this team. Do have the double Chelsea, so could maybe look elsewhere for Sanchez. I can go up to 6.9 million for that, so if there was anyone else I wanted, could go there. But I think that's the team that I've put together that I do think could be a quite good one to look at on Christmas Day. And the final question of the video comes in from Ishmael, who says, I'm doing Rice to Son today, leaving me with nothing in the bank. I want Gross for single game days, but because of 3-5-2, I have to transfer a midfielder. Looking at getting Wemo out, but I also want to bin Anderson, although I'm 0.1 short of getting in Son and Romero. It would have to, if I was to do that, it would have to be after I bring in Gross. I've got 32 transfers left. So I know he put some extra bits as well in this tweet, saying like, is it worth using all these transfers? Am I being too greedy? I think you did update the tweet as well afterwards, after the Mbeumo news got released. So obviously he is going to be out. You've kind of come up with the same solution that I would have, and it's just making all 3 transfers tonight. And Mbeumo out to Gross would save you that 0.1 million that you need to get in Son and Romero. That way you're just doing Rice, Mbeumo, Anderson to Son, Romero and Gross. I think it works out well. Obviously you're using 3 transfers, probably a bit more than you would want to use at this point, but it's 3 transfers that do just look good. Obviously you missed out on Gross yesterday, which was unfortunate, but if the transfer looks good, there's no reason why you shouldn't make it. You know, like, we do plan on using the transfers to be effective after the overhaul, but if you have to use them now and they're going to be effective, there's no reason not to. So I'd be using all 3. I think getting Mbeumo out is essential because he's now injured for a couple of weeks. Anderson looks shit, so I would definitely be bringing him out. And Rice to Gross, I think, just looks better for the single game days. So for me, you said it yourself as well, I think the best way to do it is just to get all 3 out today. But that is going to wrap up this week's Q&A. If you enjoyed, make sure to leave a like. Of course, if you want to get involved next week, jump over to my Twitter on Wednesday night, and I will answer any questions or dilemmas that you have. So again, make sure to leave a like if you enjoyed, and I will see you all in the next video.